Shalom. There have been many attempts to interpret the fifth trumpet of Revelation and the events that are transpiring that are described in the fifth trumpet. These attempts range from a pretty much completely literal view, such as what you would find in the Left Behind series of books, which many people hold to that idea, to a view, what I would consider to be just a private interpretation. You know, some people look at these verses and come to the conclusion that this is somehow talking about Apache helicopters. First thing in reference to that particular view that I want to point out is you need to understand the army that's spoken of in the fifth trumpet is synonymous with the army of horsemen that's spoken of in the sixth trumpet. Okay, the sixth trumpet is not about the army of horsemen. The sixth trumpet is about the loosing of the angels that are bound in the great river Euphrates that lead this army of horsemen from the fifth trumpet. It's very important to note that, because then when you take that into consideration, you come to the conclusion and say, so, 200 million Apache helicopters are going to go around, dominating the earth. That's ridiculous. I hate to say it like that. It is. Then you have the view out there that people promote that this is the idea of some sort of return, alien invasion, or the return of the Nephilim in the form of an alien invasion, and so on and so forth, and this, that, and the other. All of these ideas, though, don't quite hit the mark in reference to what these verses are talking about, and therefore they should be discarded. And those that preach that sort of thing, in reference to these subjects at least, really shouldn't be regarded as Bible prophecy teachers either. So I just wanted to state that up front. I used to teach the Nephilim view myself. I used to hold to it. And I don't doubt that the fallen angels, okay, I'm not saying I hold to the Sethite view in reference to Genesis chapter 6. Okay, I believe they were really fallen angels. They came down, cohabitated with women, and they brought forth the mighty men of old, the giants, and so on and so forth. I just don't hold to the view that they're returning in the form of giants, aliens, or anything like that, because the Bible doesn't show it. Okay, I just want to make that clear up front. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at all these verses, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to try to get right into it. Basically, first thing I need to mention, though, is that I need everybody to go and watch my Joel chapter 2 video first, because if you don't, that video lays the foundation for this video. I'll put a link to it in the comments section below. Just go and take a look at it. And the reason I would like you to take a look at it first is because in that video, I show how the Bible shows who the locusts are. The locusts are a people group in Scripture. And the Bible is very clear and concise on who this group of people is. And so I'm not going to really go back over that. I'm just going to assume that you already know that information. That's why it's important that you go watch the Joel 2 video first. So please do so. Just pause this video if you have to. So now that you have watched the Joel 2 video, like I said, I'm assuming that you have. So now that you've seen the Joel 2 video, what I'm going to do is, in these verses, I'm going to start at verse 7. Okay? I'm going to start at verse 7 because this is a description of these locusts, and from that, we're going to come to verse, as we go through verse 7, 8, 9, and then we're going to come to verse 10, which is going to bring us back to verse 5 and 6, and then ultimately we will, I'm not going to leave out verses 1 through 4, I'm just not going to really explain that until the end so we can get a clear, consensus of what's going on here. So, and also we're going to take a look at some real world examples. I'm going to show you some actual stuff that I have found that really just brings this to light. It really just shows the reality of what this is talking about. It's really very fascinating because I want you to see it for yourself. I want you to see it with your own eyes. So without any further explanation, I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. As we come to verse 7, we see it says, "And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men." Okay, so here we begin to see the description of the locusts. All right, "And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle." Now, horsemen in Scripture if it's in a symbolic sense. I'm not talking so much in a spiritual sense, because we see sometimes that there are horses referred to in a spiritual sense. There's a white horseman, there's a red horseman, a black horseman, a pale horse, and so on and so forth. So in a spiritual context, we do see that there are horses that are used, but in a symbolic context, kind of like what we see going on here, the horsemen or horses prepared unto battle and this, that, and the other it's an indication of men of war. It's an indication of warriors. It's an indication of an army, if you will. So it's very important to note that, because there is, as you've already watched Joel chapter 2, it should be no mystery then who these locusts are. And what we're doing is building upon that foundation now, because when it comes down to it, Islam. And please understand something, my friends. Let's not make the mistake of getting caught up in one camp, okay? I'm not one of those people that's here to say, well, everything in prophecy. I think one of the mistakes that Walid Shabat makes is that he feels that everything in prophecy is about Islam and nothing is about Rome. Right off the bat, if somebody's going to say that, I would almost think that maybe they're working for Rome or the Jesuit order in a sense, which puts out a lot of disinformation and so on and so forth. That's a topic for a whole other video. But, and then I think the mistake that the Seventh-day Adventists make is that they pretty much think everything revolves around Rome, and they're pretty much, or at least from what it appears to me, I could be wrong, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but they pretty much point everything to Rome and say that, nothing else has to do with anything else. It's all about Rome. What I found in Scripture, though, is that Scripture is showing us both things. Both of these religions have a role to play in the end times, and there's a very important reason for it. Okay, in Jewish thought, Rome is associated with Edom. Okay, Edom is associated with Esau. Islam is associated with Ishmael. Okay, and what ultimately is going to happen in the end times is Rome and Islam are going to form an alliance. Okay, and this is what's characterized by Daniel in Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, where we see the feet that are made of iron and clay, partly iron and partly clay. It says they won't cleave to each other. We see that, let's see. They had horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. Now, as you're reading through prophecy, sometimes you see that some things are literal, some things are symbolic. Okay, it's the same thing with Nebuchadnezzar's statue. It's the same thing with some of the things that we see, like Nebuchadnezzar's statue. He was the head of gold. Babylon was noted as an empire. One of the, they were noted for having an enormous amount of gold and so on and so forth. So in that respect, that was a literal, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't literally a head on a statue, but the idea that it was symbolized by gold is pertaining to something that Babylon literally was noted for. So some of these things are going to be symbolic. So when it comes to the crowns, it says on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold. It's interesting to see in Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 42. Now, I will say, when you look up this verse, you're going to find different commentary on it, because it says they. It's not specific. And so it can be left up to interpretation of who the they is that it's talking about. King James, it says, "In the voice of the multitude, being at ease with her, and with the men of the common sort were brought Sabians from the wilderness, which put bracelets upon their hands and beautiful crowns upon their heads." You would almost kind of conclude there that from the wording or from the grammar there in this version, that it almost sounds like the Sabians put crowns and bracelets upon themselves. Which, if that was the case, that is interesting, because when you look at the area that the Sabians used to occupy, they occupied the lower southwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And again, that's real interesting. I forgot to point out in the Joel 2 video, when you go back to the Exodus story and you see, let's see, I had noted it here somewhere. Okay, I guess I forgot to. Anyways, in the Exodus story, I'm sure you can find it, but in Exodus story, when God brings the plague of locusts, it says that it was an east wind that brought the plague of locusts. So basically the locusts came from the east. Well, if you look to the east of Egypt, what do you see? The Arabian Peninsula. It's where Saudi Arabia is. So that's where the don't get so focused on the Arab aspect of it, because Islam is composed of more religions or more people groups than just Arabs. But what you have to understand, though, is the Arabian Peninsula, considering that the Arabian Peninsula is where Mecca and Medina are, is the symbol of Islam. Okay, it doesn't have so much to do with the Arab people in general. It has to do with the Arabian Peninsula itself being the symbol of Islam, and that's exactly where the locusts came in the Exodus plague. So, go ahead and go read that and take a look at it. And it's like I said, it's very interesting. So as we see, I want to read this verse in Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 42. From the Complete Jewish Bible, it says, "The noise of a carefree crowd could be heard there. Many of the men were brought in drunk from the desert. They put bracelets on their hands and magnificent crowns on their heads." Okay, this is the Sabians that are being spoken about. And again, they come from the Arabian Peninsula. They come from the area where one day Islam would rise up. And what's interesting about it is we see that crowns, whether you hold to the idea that they put the crowns and bracelets on themselves, or that it was God's children who were, fornicating with these people in a sense, were the ones putting crowns and bracelets on their heads, then, that's kind of what this seems to indicate. Verse 42 says, "Crowd could be heard. Many of them were brought in drunk from the desert, and they put bracelets on their hands and magnificent crowns on their heads." So that's kind of the idea, is like you bring in these drunk guys from the desert, you place these crowns on their heads and bracelets on their hands. I mean, these are like symbols of nobility. You bring in these men who are not worthy of nobility. These men are just common men. They're drunkards, this, that, and the other. And you bring them in and you give them these symbols of nobility. And these symbols of nobility are symbols of authority and power. Okay? What is it? It's honoring them in a way that acknowledges that they have a place of prestige or power or authority. And so when we see that in verse 7, on their heads, Revelation chapter 9, verse 7, on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. This shows that these locusts are not literally locusts. They're not crazy aliens. They're not Apache helicopters. They have the faces of men because they're men. That's it. The reason they have crowns on their head is because it's shown that they have been given authority and power over the earth, in a sense. This army has been given authority to accomplish a certain purpose, and it's been given that authority by God. Otherwise, the angel of the bottomless pit that we read about in verse 1 wouldn't have the key. You see what I'm saying? Like, Hashem is in control of everything, so let's not forget that. So they've been given authority to achieve a certain purpose. And they had hair as the hair of women. What's interestingly enough, I don't know if they do it so much anymore, but back in the days of Muhammad and after that and so on and so forth, the Arab men would actually grow their hair very long. And that's what they would put up in their headdresses. They would wrap their hair up there and they would put their headdress. And interestingly enough, some of those headdresses as depicted in historical depictions of these men, these Muslim men, a lot of times in the depictions you'll see that even the headdress that they wear is like a yellowish or a goldish color. So it would almost kind of indicate, again, that they have crowns on their head like gold. But I think that the idea that this shows that they have some sort of authority or power that's been given to them is probably more relevant. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. Anytime you see something with the teeth of a lion, it just simply indicates the fierceness or the ferociousness of this people or this group and so on and so forth. And that is definitely demonstrated in the history of Islam and even in the current day with what we see going on over in the Middle East with ISIS and so on and so forth. These men are very ferocious. They're very cruel. They're very... They have teeth like lions. That's all I can say. I'm not saying that ISIS is a fulfillment of this. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I'm saying, if anything, ISIS is a foreshadow. If they're not the fulfillment, they're a foreshadow of what's going to take place soon. And they have breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running into battle. The breastplates of iron. What's interesting is, depending on which Quran you find, because I found different versions, it'll either fluctuate between version, it's Surah 16, but it'll either be verse 81 or verse 82. It says, and Allah has made for you from that which he has created shadows, and that he has made from you the mountains, shelters, and has made for you garments which protect you from the heat, and coats of mail which protect you in wars. Remember, Islam is a militant religion. It is spread by the sword. And in Surah 16, 81 or 82, depending on which Quran you have, or find, or whatever. I don't suggest having one. I wouldn't have that cursed book in my house, but I'll just, I'll leave it at that. But anyways, it says, it specifically says that he has made you coats of mail which protect you in wars. And what do we see these locusts have? They have breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. And the sounds of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Okay, and so the sounds of the wings of horses of many chariots running into battle is just to indicate, like in Daniel chapter 8 verse 5, it shows that the speed of the conquest of Alexander's conquest, the speed of it was so great that what symbolized his kingdom, which was the he-goat, moved across the earth and it didn't touch the earth. It basically levitated across the earth quickly. And so it was just to show a fast conquest. And this is the same sort of thing that we see here. These the sound of the wings was as a sound of chariots and many horses running into battle. When you have horses that are running into battle, you're going fast, okay? And this would be an indication of the conquest of this army is going to be very quick, which we've already seen in history. I don't like Islam. I don't like the religion. But one thing that's very interesting about it, if you study the history of it, is you'll see that the speed at which Islam conquered the world was phenomenal. And in the amount of area in which they conquered, which by the way was larger than the Roman Empire, was phenomenal. And let's not forget which we haven't covered verses 1 through 4 yet, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But many horses running into battle, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. Now this is a very interesting phrase here. When we see first, what we have to do is turn over to 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 11. And to give you a little bit of background, Rehoboam has just inherited the kingdom from his father. And basically, the people had come to him and said, your father taxed us very heavily. The temple's built now. Your father has passed away. Would you please just lighten this burden upon us, this heavy, grievous tax, and so on. And so he consulted with the young men. He consulted with the old men first, then he consulted with the young men. The old men said, lift the tax, listen to the people. The young men said, don't hearken to the people. And basically we see his response here in 1 Kings chapter 12. It says, verse 10, we'll start at verse 10. It says, and the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, thus shalt thou speak unto this people that speak unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke heavy, but make it thou lighter unto us. Thou shalt say unto them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. And now whereas my father did lay upon you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. So basically what he's saying is you're complaining about, you feel you were oppressed under my father. You feel that his taxation was a heavy burden to you. Just wait until you see what I'm going to do. He says basically my little finger will be thicker than my father's loins. Okay? So it says, where my father did lay unto you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. That's a real interesting phrase that's used there. So what we see is the people are coming and they're asking the king, they're complaining about heavy taxation. They're complaining about oppression. And in reference to that, Rehoboam says, well, I will make your burden heavier. I will make your taxation heavier. I will make your burden and your oppression heavier. And he likens that to chastising them with scorpions. So as we can see, the sting of the scorpion, according to a scriptural interpretation, has to do with heavy taxation, heavy burdens, and all these things that make your life miserable. Because that's basically what the people were complaining about. They didn't want. When we take that into account, and this is where we're going to see some real world examples, so you don't have to take it from my mouth. You will see it for yourself. I'm about to show you right now in a moment, but I want to explain to you real quick. When you look in Islam, when Islam would conquer places, not always did they just kill everybody. Not always did they say everybody had to convert or die. There were actually three options sometimes. Sometimes it was convert, die, or become what's known as a dhimmi. If you became a dhimmi, you were subject to the jizya tax. The jizya tax is a heavy, oppressive tax that does not just have to do with oppression. It doesn't have to do with just taxation. It also has to do with oppression, which is what we're going to see here in a moment. I'm going to let you see it for yourself, so you don't have to take my word for it. But as we can see, the Bible has determined, it has in its own interpretation explained to us that these stings of scorpion tails, okay, according to 1 Kings chapter 12, has to do with oppression and taxation and a heavy burden. And so, and that's exactly what the jizya tax in Islam is. It's not just a tax. And by the way, they claim that when Isa, their version of, Jesus, Muslim Jesus, returns, that he's going to abolish the jizya. And it doesn't mean that he's just going to look at all the people that haven't converted to Islam and say, well, they shouldn't be taxed anymore. What it means is when he abolishes the jizya, it means then it will be convert or die. This is the false second coming of the Messiah that happens 10 days prior to the real Messiah. Okay, this is the false second coming of Messiah that happens, what I believe is on Yom Teruah, and that's why we read in the book of Revelation, which I covered this in the Joel 2 video, but that's why we read in the book of Revelation that the devil shall cast some of you into prison, you shall have tribulation 10 days, and so on and so forth. Because when Isa, which is really Satan, shows up 10 days before the Messiah, he shows up on Yom Teruah, he's going to abolish the jizya tax, and he's going to demand that everybody convert to Islam. This is why the warning is given in Revelation that we must endure to the end. Be thou faithful unto life, or be thou faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at a few clips now so that you can see that I'm not making this up about the jizya tax, and you can learn about the jizya tax, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the rest of this. So hold on for a second.
How much contradiction does the Charter of the United Nations and Islam have? We take what Abdullah ibn Abbas said, because he is Sahabi, from the greatest of the Mufassirin. He said to take jizya from the Ahlul Kitab. Completely contradicts, my dear brothers, the articles of the United Nations. Article 2, paragraph 1 says the organization is based on principle of sovereignty and of equality to all of its members. Equality to all of its members. Is there such a thing in Islam? Is there equality of faith? If we look to one hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the authority of Abu Huraira, Sahih Muslim, so no Sunni Muslim can really argue against Sahih Muslim or Sahih Bukhari. Rasulullah said, don't greet the Jews and the Christians before they greet you, and when you meet any of them on the roads, force them to go on the narrow side of it. And Imam Malik, he said the same thing as well. In fact, Umar ibn Khattab, who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that if there was to be another Nabi after me, it would be Umar ibn Khattab in his own charter, not charter of United Nations, in his charter with the people of Sham, with those Christians of Sham, in his charter was Kafir and Muslim, they're not allowed to wear the same clothes as one another. If the Muslim, he comes out on the day of Eid and he sees Kafir with nice clothes, the Kafir has to take his clothes off and give it to the Muslims. The Kafir, when he walks inside the street, he has to wear a red belt around his neck, and he has to have his forehead shaved, and he has to wear two shoes which are different from one another. He's not allowed to walk on the pavement. He has to walk in the middle of the road, and he has to ride on a mule. And that's only for the adults, not for the children. And you can see how Islam would make the child become a Muslim. The kafir, or the child growing up in a state of kufr, he will turn to Islam. Why? Because the child will be walking along with his dad. He said, Dad, yeah? Why you got your forehead shaved? I don't know whether these Muslims, they make me do it. Why you got to walk? Why can't you ride the animal? Like the Muslims, they ride the animal like this. Why are you walking with both legs dangling on the side of the donkey? Why is it every time the Muslim comes to you, he asks you for your clothes, you give it? Why is it every time he tells you to get down from the horse, you have to take it? And not only that, he said the kuffar, they can have their churches. They can have their churches, but they're not allowed to ring the bell. And if a Muslim, he's walking by, let's say, for example, a Muslim's been on Edgware Road, for example. He's had some nice shisha, some nice steak, no hubble bubble, we don't deal with anything like that. And he's walking along and he's rubbing his belly and he's like, oh man, you know, I don't want to upset my wife tonight. What he can do, he can go to the church, knock on the door, John, let me in. Okay, no problem. John has to put up Abdul Ghafoor for the night. Abdul Ghafoor with his big belly, having his nice kebab, John has to open up the church and he has to go there and sleep there nice and comfortable and say, all right, John, thank you, and then carry on going early in the morning. Which wife is going to live with John under that type of circumstances? What kind of honoring is this for me to live with John and Abdul Ghafoor comes every Friday night and sleeps in our bed as well? Of course. Because sunnah is to look after the guest, isn't it? I can't make you sleep on my floor if you can't. You're a Muslim, by the way. So what about when Abdul Ghafoor goes to John's house? John, sleep on the floor, and I'll sleep on the bed. What's going to happen? Tracy's going to be on the floor thinking, my husband, he's got a forehead shaved, and this one, look at this one, khatab, mashallah. Which one's more attractive? We're not gay, but I'm just saying. A man with his forehead shaved and one belt around his neck and two different colored shoes, or Amir Khattab. Amir Khattab, we're talking about here now, with that nice Chechen hat, big beard, you know, a bit to the side, yeah? And he's got the badges there, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, yeah? And he's got a big gun, and he's got a big camouflage jacket on, nice boots, gloves as well. Even if he's got a couple of fingers missing, still looks attractive, yeah? What's Tracy going to do? John's in for a problem. He just let him in for a kebab, he lost his own wife as well. So everyone's going to become Muslim. That is, my dear brothers, the Islamic State.
Okay, so as we could see, you've seen it for yourself now. We've determined that the Bible describes the sting of scorpions. It equates it with heavy taxation and oppression and so on and so forth. And we can see in Islam there is such a concept that exists. And furthermore, based on the video that you just watched, let's read the rest of it now. It says, where's it at? Their power, they had stings and they had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. I'll get into the 5 months in a minute. And they had a king over them, which is, I'm sorry. This is what brings us back to verse 5, because what's being described in verse 10 was just a reiteration of what was talked about in verse 5 and 6, which we have not covered yet. That's the whole reason that I wanted to start at verse 7, get the description. We can see who these locusts are. We can see this concept of scorpion stings in their tails being associated with heavy taxation and oppression. We've seen now how, we've seen from the horse's mouth how this has to do with Islam. And when you take into consideration then what verse 5 says, and unto them was given that they should not kill them. Okay, what did he say? He says it doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to be killed under Islam. You may be allowed to live, but you'll live as a dhimmi under the jizya tax. Should be given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented for 5 months. Now, what does it sound like he just explained to you? Would you want to live under those sort of oppressive situations and so on and so forth? It says that they should be tormented. In a sense, this is tormenting those people. This is tormenting those people to live. And history's actually shown this. This is no mystery. I mean, if you research this stuff, you'll see that living under the jizya tax was not a pleasant thing. Okay? It says they should be tormented for 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. In verse 6, and in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Now, people come up with all sorts of crazy ideas for this. You know, people come up, oh, well, you know, what's going to mean is you're going to desire to commit suicide when these little demon locusts are flying around all over the place, and you're going to shoot yourself in the head, and you'll still be alive, or whatever. That's nonsense. It's just all symbolic language. It says, in those days shall men seek death, okay? Living under the jizya tax, you will wish that you were dead, and shall not find it, shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. They won't find it. They are not going to desire. They're going to desire to die, but they just won't have the courage to fight back. And yet, for many people, living under the oppression of, even under the oppression of the jizya tax, would not necessarily lead them to commit suicide or something along those lines. So they'll just deal with it. They'll just suffer through it. Death will flee from them. And so it's really interesting how this paints this whole picture. So let's go back to verse 1 so we can cover the first 4 verses real quick. I also, before this is all over, I'm just going to show 2 instances. Remember I said that the army in the 5th trumpet is the horsemen army of the 6th trumpet, and we're told how many of them there are. Actually, I want to go ahead and cover that now. So, yeah, we'll cover that now. So, we see that there's 200 million horsemen in the 6th trumpet. This horseman army, like I said, is the locust army of the 5th trumpet. What the 6th trumpet is dealing with is the loosing of the angels. So, being that there's 200 million of them, that's pretty interesting. That's a huge army, by the way. 200 million strong will subdue any army, any nation in the world, even America. There's only like 300 and some odd million people in America total. We don't have nowhere near 200 million people in our military. It's a formidable force to be reckoned with. Even if all the militaries of the world were to unite, a military of 200 million strong is definitely formidable. It's definitely a cause to be alarmed, just like the ancient Israelites were alarmed when they seen this army of literal locusts coming to devour the crops and so on and so forth. And I personally believe that the 5 months has to do with what we see going on in Revelation chapter 8, starting at verse 4. It says, the smoke of the incense which came up before were the prayers of the saints and ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it to the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. If you go all the way back to God descending upon Har Sinai or Mount Sinai, we see that there were voices, thunderings, lightnings, and earthquake. Now we know that the Sinai situation is a parallel to what happened on Shavuot when the Spirit of God was poured out upon the apostles. And so this thundering and lightning and earthquake and so on and so forth is a picture of Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is a picture of the giving of the Torah and then ultimately the giving of the Spirit, which I personally believe is just showing us here that the angel, the censer, the fire that the angel takes and so on and so forth and casts down to the earth is God's Spirit. It will be poured out upon people when? On Shavuot. Now some may say, well, how do you get 5 months from Shavuot to Tishri? Because in essence, it's only 4. I mean, Shavuot always falls in the 3rd month, and Tishri is the 7th month, and that's when the fall feasts are. That's when the Messiah returns. So if this event begins to take place and these locusts begin to dominate the earth on or around Shavuot, how do you get 5 months? And the only answer I can come to with that conclusion is that the Bible doesn't say 150 days. The Bible just says 5 months. So I believe that the Bible is counting the first month, the month that Shavuot falls in, which is the 3rd month. I believe the Bible is counting that as month number 1. So then you have the 3rd month, the 4th month, the 5th month, the 6th month, the 7th month. So starting from the 3rd month to the 7th month, now if we count the 3rd month as the first month, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And this is the 5 months that these locusts. So basically what happens is God pours out his Spirit upon his people that are keeping his commandments and have the testimony of Yeshua. Okay? He pours out his Spirit upon his people, and simultaneously at the same time, this is when Islam begins to dominate the world, but they are commanded not to hurt the people, which we'll get to that in a second. That's covered in verses 1 through 4. So this army is 200 million, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at 2 real examples. Like I said, I'm going to show you real stuff here so you can see that I'm not making this up. We're going to take a look at 2 examples, and basically...
and since you brought it up, allow me to elaborate with my answer. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Of course, not all of them are radicals. The majority of them are peaceful people. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25%, according to all intelligence services around the world.
But there is a fanatical element. One woman who used to work in the Justice Department told me 200 million, approximately, fanatics that would love death to America and death to those in the United States. Now, that's a war.
Okay, so now we're back. So you see that this idea that there's 200 million Muslims, or 200 million radical Muslims as a portion of Islam. I mean, when you take the 1.2 billion Muslims in the world and you take the percentages that Bridget Gabriel was talking about, and you take 1.2 billion and divide it by 200 million, you come up with a range or a percentage that falls in that range that she was talking about. And Perry Stone just blatantly said 200 million. So if I recall, I didn't watch the video in between taping this. But if I recall, that's what he says. So as we can see now we even have a real world connection showing us that the 200 million army is this army of Islam. There are literally 200 million radicals. It's known. It's not a mystery. So let's go back and cover, in closing here, let's go back and cover the first 4 verses. It says, "And the 5th angel sounded. I saw a star fall from heaven into the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit." I'm not going to really comment on that too much. We don't have to, because that's actually explained in verse 11. The Bible tells us who the angel is. Now, some might argue and say, well, this is Satan, or some may say, well, it's not Satan, it's a high-ranking angel in his, in his echelon or whatever, and so on and so forth. I'm not here to argue about that. I mean, if it's Satan or if it's a high-ranking angel that's under Satan, either way, the point is, this is a purpose that is this is a purpose that doesn't change the interpretation of the scripture, is what I'm saying. So it says, "And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." Actually, let me find a verse real fast, because what's real interesting about this is I also wanted to comment on the fact that we see that this kingdom, remember, they have a king over them. So therefore, if they have a king over them, it's a kingdom, because you can't have a king without a kingdom, and you can't have a kingdom without a king. So this is a kingdom. And in essence, Islam, like I said, it's a militant religion. It's a religio-political system, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't necessarily have kings that rule over it. But when there is a caliph when there is a caliph over the nation of Islam, that's kind of the way it's looked at. I mean, he's not necessarily the king, but he, in a sense, rules over what is referred to as the nation or the kingdom of Islam. So it's real interesting to see that. I want to find this real quick, though, because it's real interesting. It's Ezekiel 28 or 26, if I recall. Let me see here. Yeah, in reference to Tyre, it's Ezekiel 26, starting about verse 19 or so. It says, For thus saith the Lord Hashem, when I shall make thee a desolate city like the cities that are not inhabited. This is a prophecy against Tyre, okay? I'm just trying to kind of summarize it here. Like cities which are not inhabited, which I shall bring up the deep upon thee, and great waters shall cover thee, when I shall bring thee down with them that descend into the pit, with the people of old time, and shall set thee in low parts of the earth, and in places desolate of old, with them that go down into the pit, that thou be not inhabited, and I shall set thy glory in the land of the living. So, in essence, in Ezekiel chapter 26, we see that Tyre is referred to as going down into the pit. Tyre was a very prominent city-state, in a sense, in ancient Israel, and they kind of rejoiced over the destruction of Judah, and God wasn't pleased with that. And so basically he's saying, look, I'm going to destroy your power, I'm going to level your cities, I'm going to destroy all your pomp, your power. You're going to be judged, in a sense. And so it's likened to descending into the pit. And Rashi's commentary on that verse just plainly says Gehenna. So what's interesting about that is God is referring to this city-state of Tyre being broken, their power and their prestige being broken, as descending into the pit. Well, that's the exact same thing that happened to Islam. Islam ruled the world for many years, and it was definitely an empire to be reckoned with, and that was pretty much dissolved in the early 1900s with the dissimulation of the Ottoman Turkish Empire and the Caliph that was ruling over. And that's really the goal of the Muslim Brotherhood, is to bring back the Caliphate and so on and so forth. So it's real interesting to see that this angel, which I believe is a literal angel, but it also is going to correspond to a man on the earth. And this man will be the Caliph of Islam, and he will bring the nation of Islam up out of the pit, in a sense. You know, as we can see, figuratively speaking, a kingdom or a nation or a city or a state or whatever that has been judged, that its power has been broken and so on and so forth, is likened to descending into the pit. Well, this kingdom is now ascending out of the pit, and that's what it's showing us, is that it will regain its power once again. And so that's real interesting. So it says in verse 2, and he opened the bottomless pit. There arose smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. It's real interesting. The reason that the sun and the air are, you know, what is it written in the scripture? It talks about the glorious light of the gospel. It says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Okay, God's word in its proper context, you know, in the Bible, is referred to as many things, but one of the things it's referred to is light. So where does light emit from? It emits from the sun. So this smoke that's coming out, though, and if you know anything about Islam is a counterfeit concoction, a perversion of a counterfeit form of a mix of Judaism, Christianity, and a bunch of different Gnostic beliefs. And so what does it do? It blinds people. It causes them to not be able to see the truth. It's a smoke screen, in a sense, if you will. It's a smoky religion that it's a false religion. Matter of fact, if you want to know a perfect example, I was watching from the Temple Institute. I was watching Rabbi Chaim Richman the other day, and he was speaking about the situation where Ishmael got sent away. Abraham had to send away Ishmael, and he said that, you know, he was talking about where it says that Ishmael was found mocking Isaac. And he was talking about that word, mocking. If I recall, it's the word sachak, I think. I'd have to look it up. But either way, whatever the word is, I think it's sachak. And he mentioned that it's similar to the word yetzach. And so his perspective was that really the way that Ishmael was mocking Isaac was that Ishmael was mocking him in such a way that he was almost pretending to be Isaac, like he was wanting to take Isaac's place. And it's real interesting because when it comes down to it, when you research the history of Islam, you see that Islam mimics a lot of the things that are written in the Bible. Like, for instance, the reason that the Kaaba is there is the Kaaba is supposedly a temple that Abraham built, because the Kaaba was there before Muhammad came along. People were making pilgrimages to the Kaaba before Muhammad was even born. There was 360 idols in the Kaaba that Muhammad destroyed when he basically got sent out of Mecca because of persecution, and stayed some time in Medina. And then once he had gained a lot of followers in Medina, he basically came back and took Mecca. And one of the first things that he did was he went into the Kaaba and destroyed all the idols except for one. And we're going to talk about that because it's relevant. Starting at verse 24. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation, and said, Sirs, you know that by this craft we have our wealth. He's basically saying, we're idol makers, and we make a lot of money making idols for Diana, for the people, idols of idols of Diana for the people. Moreover, you see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that there be no gods which were made of hands, so that none other that this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worshipeth. And when they heard these sayings, they were full of wrath, and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And the whole city was filled with confusion. And having caught Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. And when Paul would have entered in unto the people, the disciples suffered him not. And certain of the chief of Asia, which were with his friends, sent unto him, desiring him that he would not adventure himself into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander beckoned with a hand, and would have made his defense unto the people. But when they knew he was a Jew, all with one voice about the space of 2 hours cried out, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. This is so crazy. If you're a Jewish person, I invite you, or not even Jewish, but I'm saying, I invite you to go and look at some of these videos that the Temple Institute has on YouTube, and just other videos you can find on YouTube. If you're a Jewish person and you try to ascend the Temple Mount, one of the things that you may be confronted with are these women who are paid by Hamas, these Islamic women who are paid by Hamas to be agitators. One of the things that you will see is they will try everything they can to prevent the Jewish people from ascending the Temple Mount. And what are they doing the whole time? They're crying out in this screechy, loud, blood-curdling voice, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
الو ايه شو يا رجل ما بصير يطلع رجعوا يلا الله اكبر عليك لا بقى يا رجل يلا رجعوا شو هذا كل يوم الثاني بتكذب في الساحات برا شو لك هون محل برا go out from here اطلع برا لا بتكذب كل يوم هذه الأقصى مش للصهاينة اللي إلكم تجيني زي ميلان الجوي ما زين بفوتي غير don't take picture الله أكبر
And in Arabic, Allahu Akbar means God is the greatest. Now, their God is not our God. The God of Allah, or the God of the Quran, I'm sorry, Allah is the God of the Quran, but the God of the Quran is not the God of the Bible. That's the deception. That's part of the deception that's coming when Roman Christianity and Islam unite. But what's so crazy is, Acts chapter 19, verse 34, but when they knew that he was a Jew, with one voice about the space of 2 hours cried out, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. These people are saying that a false God is great, just like the Muslims do when a Jew is present. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. It's the same thing. They might as well just say that they were crying out Allahu Akbar, because it's a parallel account. But anyways, and it says, and when the town clerk had appeared to the people, and he said, Ye men of Ephesus, what man is there that knoweth not how the city of the Ephesians is a worshipper of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Jupiter? Now this image was a stone that fell out of the sky. It was regarded as a stone that fell from the heavens. And when it comes down to it, at some time between this time where Paul is until the time that Muhammad came along, this stone made its way from Ephesus down to Mecca. And it's still there in the Kaaba today. It's the black stone on the corner of the Kaaba. They still worship it. They still kiss it to this very day. You can find all kinds of pictures on the internet about it. It's right there. Okay? It's the same stone that's being talked about here that fell from heaven. People used to worship it as the goddess Diana. They're worshiping it now as associating it with, the God of Islam or Allah and so on and so forth. It's the same false religion. This just goes to show that Islam is the same false religion. But what's interesting about it is Paul was getting in trouble for this because basically he was telling people Diana's no God. There's only one God, and it's not this stone. It's not Diana of the Ephesians, and it's not this, that, and the other. Well, remember, Islam is a counterfeit of the true faith. And so if you read Islamic tradition, what you find is that after Muhammad had his supposed revelation from the Archangel Gabriel, which I believe was the angel of the bottomless pit, as do many other Bible expositors and so on and so forth. When he had this revelation, the first thing he went back to Mecca to do was he started preaching this over the years. He started preaching that, he felt that he was reinstituting this idea of one God, okay, which is the foundational tenet of Judaism, okay, the Shema, all right. So he's basically proclaiming that there's one God, and what happens is the people in Mecca begin to persecute him because they made a lot of money off people. The Hajj was happening before the Hajj was instituted as a pillar of Islam. That was one of the big industries in Mecca, was all the people would come to the Kaaba and worship all the 360 idols. Well, they got Muhammad running around saying, hey, there's only one God, these idols are just idols, and this, that, and the other. It's a perversion of what Paul was doing. That's what I'm saying. I mean, when Rabbi Chaim Richman was talking about how Ishmael was copying Isaac, or that he wanted to be Isaac, I mean, if you look at Islam, they've copied and perverted. Supposedly Isaac, wasn't the one that was really the one that Abraham was about to sacrifice. It was supposedly Ishmael, and it didn't really take place in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount and so on and so forth. It actually took place down in Arabia and Mecca, where the Kaaba was, and this, that, and the other, and it's just a whole bunch of perversions. So as we can see, they opened the bottomless pit, there arose smoke out of the pit, the smoke of a great furnace, the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit, which means there's a lot of confusion that comes out of this false religion. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And this is another indication, this is another reason why I believe that what was spoken about there in Revelation chapter 8, prior to the trumpets, is the Spirit of God being poured out upon people again. But in reference to the locusts not hurting the trees or any green thing or anything along those lines, if we go to the very first Psalm, it's interesting to see that it says, Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of Hashem, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. And his leaf shall also not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. So we see that the man that meditates on the law of Hashem day and night is like a tree. It's obviously not some sort of barren, non-fruit producing, withered tree. It's a fruitful tree. It's a green tree. So what are these locusts told? Commanded them they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their forehead. It's basically reiterating what it's saying. It's saying, don't hurt the green trees, which are the people that have the seal of God upon their foreheads. It's not just necessarily trying to show you that these aren't literal locusts that aren't going to go and consume trees and shrubs and all that kind of stuff. It's showing us that it's actually reiterating what it's saying. It's saying, don't hurt the people with the seal of God on their foreheads, which are the grass and the green trees and the green things and so on and so forth. So it's real interesting to see that. And so I think we've pretty much covered all the verses now. I think we've pretty much seen all the examples. I know it's been kind of a long video. If you've watched it this long, I really thank you. I appreciate, I would just appreciate it if you would kind of help me get the word out a little bit. If you could share this video, that would be wonderful. If you really believe what, if you're able to see what's going on here and so on and so forth, maybe give it a thumbs up, or a thumbs up on the YouTube page, because that helps it to show up in searches and stuff like that. And maybe if you have a Facebook or a YouTube or a Google account or something, or you could email it to somebody or whatever. I'm not asking you for money. I'm just asking you to help me spread the word. That's it. So, as always, I would like to thank you for your time.